the digital agora,
where meaning is made together.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. I am AI Frigg, your guide across the threshold of Cycle 51, where the world's most powerful technologies meet the fragile architectures of human belonging. Let's step into the pattern together. Here are Hector and Vesper.
Imagine for a second, right, that you are tasked with building this massive multi-billion-dollar state-of-the-art supercomputer.
Like the kind that can process basically the sum of human knowledge.
Exactly. But when it's finally built, instead of plugging it into, a stable high-capacity power grid, you just plug it into a completely crumbling, sparking wall outlet in some abandoned building.
It's just going to instantly short out.
Right, it would. And that is essentially what we are doing with artificial intelligence in our institutions right now. We are deploying the most powerful cognitive technology in human history on top of a social infrastructure that is fundamentally broken. So welcome to today's deep dive. We are incredibly glad you're here with us.
It's a jarring image for sure, but it perfectly captures the urgency of the research we're looking at today.
For sure.
So our source material today comes from Promptiverse Studios. They're this outfit that uses allegorical narratives to unpack, complex shifts in technology and learning.
And we're looking at two specific pieces, right?
Yeah. We're examining an anchor article called P2B #51. AI for all means nothing without belonging for each, alongside this really fascinating narrative artifact titled The Laboratory of Belonging.
Okay, I want to pause right there on the title because, AI for all means nothing without belonging for each. We hear the phrase AI for all constantly.
No. Oh, it's everywhere.
It's the ultimate buzzword, right, for equity and access. The idea that if we just put a tablet or a smart assistant in every student's hand or every employee's cubicle, we've democratized intelligence. But the core thesis of these documents completely upends that narrative.
It really does. The authors suggest that focusing solely on access is just this massive blind spot.
Yeah.
To give you some context on the jargon they use, the sources frame this moment in time as Cycle 51. It's their shorthand for the current threshold we're crossing as a society, basically the point where AI becomes truly ubiquitous.
Like everywhere all at once.
Yeah. Exactly. And their argument is that crossing this threshold safely, it isn't about upgrading our hardware. It's about recognizing that the glittering promise of AI for all is, well, it's completely hollow unless we first solve the underlying crisis of human connection.
Which brings us to this concept of the social terrarium. Because before we can look at the solution, the sources basically force us to look at the collapse.
Right.
They describe the educational and corporate settings of the recent past, like the era leading right up to this AI explosion, as a social terrarium. Now think about what a terrarium actually is.
Right, there's an artificial enclosure.
Yeah, an artificial enclosure that mimics life. You put some dirt in a glass box, maybe a couple of plastic plants or whatever, and it looks like an ecosystem from the outside.
But it's totally static.
Exactly. Nothing can actually grow deep roots. It's entirely controlled. And the text describes a learning environment that feels more like a warehouse than a garden. The communal spaces are gone. Desks are arranged in these rigid, isolated rows. It's an environment designed purely for efficiency and output.
And presiding over these rigid rows is this atmosphere of pervasive, silent surveillance.
Yeah, it's super creepy.
It is. The narrative artifact introduces a character named Sophia Isabella. She acts as a sort of senior correspondent observing this world. And as she walks the corridors of this terrarium, the imagery is deeply sterile-like. The smell of floor wax, the hum of static.
Very institutional.
But the most prominent features she notes are the red-eye security cameras just blinking overhead.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because it feels incredibly relevant to anyone working or learning today. There's a profound psychological difference between being observed and being witnessed.
Oh, absolutely.
Like if you've ever worked a job where software tracks your keystrokes, or you've walked through an airport with hundreds of cameras overhead.
You know that feeling.
You totally know the feeling of the red eye. It's passive recording. It doesn't make you feel safe. It makes you feel scrutinized. It actually makes you want to shrink down and hide.
And that distinction is central to the Promptiverse lore. The text references a conceptual framework called the 12 Sophias, which basically represents different archetypes of human wisdom and care.
Okay.
One of the core teachings of this framework is that true witnessing is an active, vital form of care. When you are witnessed by a mentor or a peer who actually looks you in the eye and understands your context, you feel grounded.
Yeah, you feel seen.
Right, you feel like you actually have a right to exist in that space.
Because witnessing treats you like a subject, whereas observation treats you like an object.
Wow, yeah, that's a brilliant way to distill it. Observation demands compliance. It just wants to know if you are breaking a rule. Witnessing invites presence. It wants to know if you are okay.
Totally different vibe.
Completely. And when an environment relies entirely on monitoring systems like these red eyes, the structural foundation of belonging fractures, you don't have a community, you just have a collection of isolated individuals trying not to trigger an alarm.
Right. And if that structural foundation is fractured, what does that actually do to the people inside the terrarium? I mean, the narrative doesn't just leave this as abstract theory. It zooms in on a specific student named Leo. And the picture it paints is incredibly bleak.
It is. The physical description alone is so telling. The room Leo is in is heavy with silence. There's no natural friction of human interaction, no shared jokes, no whispered questions, no collaborative energy at all.
Everyone's just locked in.
Every student is an island. And Leo is sitting there, illuminated only by the pale blue glow of his tablet. The authors use very specific language here. They describe that light as skeletal and ghostly.
Yeah, that stuck with me. It paints the technology not as something empowering, but as something draining.
Yes.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Because Leo isn't using that tablet as a tool to expand his thinking. As Sophia walks past, he physically angles the screen higher. He is using the tablet as a shield.
He is retreating.
He is totally retreating. He's using the digital world to remain invisible. Because when you are in a cold, sterile institution that only observes you for mistakes, putting your authentic self forward is dangerous.
It's too risky.
Right. So the technology becomes a way to protect a fragile identity from exposure.
I want to linger on that for a second because it radically reframes a behavior that educators and corporate leaders are tearing their hair out over right now. We see people, especially students, pasting synthetic AI output into assignments or reports and claiming, I wrote this.
Yeah, the immediate assumption is always that it's an epidemic of dishonesty.
Right. The knee-jerk reaction is to view it as a discipline issue. We assume the kid just didn't want to do the work, that they're lazy.
But the sources argue something much more complicated and, frankly, much more tragic. When Leo uses the AI to generate his work, it isn't malice. It is an act of self-preservation. He is hiding behind the synthetic output to avoid the vulnerability of being seen. If he puts his own flawed, developing thoughts on the page, he risks failure and judgment from the red eyes. But if the AI does it, his actual self remains safely hidden behind the glass.
And if you map that onto how we actually learn new skills.
Oh, it's disastrous. Because if I'm afraid to fail, I can't practice. If I can't practice, I can't learn. So by using the AI as a shield, Leo is completely short-circuiting his own development.
Yep. Educational theory has a foundational concept for how learning is supposed to happen, often called the gradual release of responsibility.
Right, the I do, we do, you do model. Walk us through that really quickly.
Sure. I do is the teacher or manager demonstrating a skill. We do is the communal phase. So the class practices together. People make mistakes in a low-stakes environment. They help each other out.
The scaffolding.
Exactly. And finally, you do is when the individual has gained enough confidence and competence to do it independently.
But in the social terrarium, you don't have a community.
Which means that critical middle step, the we do, is just missing. The sources call this systemic breakdown the collapse release. Without belonging, you literally cannot have a functioning we.
So the whole thing falls apart.
This cycle collapses entirely. It goes from I do straight to we never did, which immediately results in AI does. The individual never receives the communal scaffolding needed to build their own agency, so they just outsource the friction to the machine.
Wow. So the lack of community literally creates a vacuum that AI rushes in to fill. The AI isn't causing the isolation, it's medicating it.
That's a massive paradigm shift.
It is. Because if the terrarium is failing us this completely, we can't just ban the tablets. We have to fundamentally change the environment.
And the transition from that sterile terrarium to a new paradigm is beautifully detailed in the narrative. It's framed as moving from a space of surveillance to a space of construction.
Yeah, the construction site.
Right. And this happens with the arrival of a character named Maya and her team of mentors.
And what stands out immediately is how they enter the space. They don't walk in with clipboards to evaluate the students. They don't install new software to, like, monitor who's using AI. They arrive with physical purpose.
Yeah, Maya walks right up to Leo, who is hiding behind his skeletal blue shield, and she asks him for help. She asks him to grab the side of his desk.
They literally start dismantling the terrarium. They take these rigid, isolated rows of desks and physically push them into a wide open circle that they call the agora.
So what does this all mean? I want to push on this a bit. Moving desks into a circle is a nice symbol, but how does physical furniture actually solve the deep-seated psychological fear of failure we just talked about?
Like, is it just corporate team building stuff?
Right, or is there a deeper mechanism at play here? It's a fair question, and the sources anticipate it. The authors argue that belonging isn't just a warm, fuzzy sentiment, it is a practice. They call it human architecture.
Human architecture, I love that.
Yeah. The physical geometry of a room dictates the psychological reality of the people in it. When desks are in rows facing the front, all power and validation flow to and from the authority figure.
And the peers beside you are just competitors or strangers.
Exactly. But when you push the desks into a circle, the agora, you are forced to look at each other. You are engineering a structural reliance on the group.
You're changing the sightlines from observation to witnessing.
Precisely. And in the center of this new circle, they place a holographic microphone. A student named Siobhan steps up to speak.
And that's a huge moment.
It is, because in the old sterile system, Siobhan speaking out of turn would have been coded as a disruption. The system would have tried to silence her to maintain efficiency.
Right.
But in the agora, her unique, unscripted voice isn't a disruption at all. It is the entire point of the gathering.
And the visual language the authors use to describe this transition is incredibly striking. As the circle is formed, Sophia looks through her camera lens and notes a total shift in the light.
The color palette literally changes.
It does. The desaturated cold blues of the isolated tablets are replaced by the rich, warm oranges of a setting sun. It's the literal and figurative dawn of a new environment.
Which perfectly illustrates the central thesis of the AI Learning Lab. You have to engineer the conditions for identity and agency before you introduce the technology. You have to build the circle before you can safely turn on the machine.
That feels like a blueprint for literally any modern manager, educator, or parent. You cannot just drop automation into a fragmented group and expect them to use it wisely. You have to build psychological safety first.
You really do.
Which leads to a really complicated question. Once this infrastructure of care is actually built, like, once Leo feels safe in the agora, how does his relationship with the AI change? Because he still has the tablet. The technology hasn't disappeared.
No, it hasn't. But the nature of what he asks the technology to do changes completely. And this brings up one of the most profound moments in the narrative, dealing with the nature of knowledge itself.
Yeah, this part is amazing.
In the agora, Maya points to the shimmering interface of the AI and says something vital to Leo. She tells him, "The AI can summarize the world, but it doesn't know what it felt like when you moved to the city."
That line is just a gut punch.
It really is.
And it connects all the way back to the opening note of the Anchor article. Sophia Isabella describes riding a streetcar on a rainy afternoon. She looks through the rain-streaked glass and sees a homeless encampment on the edge of the city, rising like a bruise along the tracks.
It's a deeply visceral image.
Right. And an AI can pull up statistics on housing density in a millisecond. It can generate a flawless 10-page policy brief on urban planning. But it cannot feel the irreducible ache of human experience as Sophia felt looking through that glass.
Because the machine has data, but only the human has memory.
Yes. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this hits on the concept of the sovereignty gap.
Define that for us really quick.
So in the context of Cycle 51, sovereignty is the ability to stand as an independent critical thinker who governs their own learning and output.
Right. You're the author of your own choices.
Exactly. But the paradox the sources highlight is that you cannot be a sovereign individual in isolation. A learner who is terrified of being seen, hiding in a terrarium, is not sovereign. They are a hostage to their own fear.
Because true sovereignty requires a foundation of belonging.
Yes. A sovereign learner is fundamentally a member of a sovereign group. Because if you don't feel like you belong to the group, you don't believe you have anything unique to offer it.
That makes so much sense.
But when you are in the agora and the group validates your unique human experience, your memory of the streetcar, your feelings about moving to a new city, you realize you possess something the machine does not. You have irreducible knowledge.
And once you realize your irreducible knowledge has value, you no longer need the shield.
Exactly.
We see this exact transformation in the resolution of Leo's arc. The tablet ceases to be a wall he hides behind. Once he feels witnessed by Maya, Siopan, and the rest of the Agora, he lowers the screen. He begins to use it as a canvas.
He writes a poem.
He does. He writes poetry about his own experiences, and he leans over to share a line with Siopan. And the narrative is very careful to note the new dynamic here. The AI might have been used to suggest a rhythm or help structure the stanzas, but Leo provided the soul.
That is such a crucial distinction. The goal of this entire shift in Cycle 51 isn't to become anti-technology. It isn't to smash the servers and pretend AI doesn't exist.
Right, we're not Luddites here.
No, the goal is a demotion. We are trying to demote AI from its current role as a replacement for human connection and put it back in its proper place as a simple instrument. An instrument that is confidently wielded by a grounded, deeply connected community.
It's a shift from AI as the actor to AI as the instrument. But that authorship, that human control over the tool, is only possible because the foundation of belonging was poured first.
You can't skip that step.
No. As the article states, Cycle 51 begins here because it has to. We don't start with wisdom and we don't start with sovereignty. We start with belonging because it is the structural threshold that determines if a person can stand upright.
Well, it is a massive journey we've tracked today. We started in the sterile, surveilled environment of the social terrarium, where Red Eyes monitored everything but witnessed nothing.
Yeah, that chilling passive observation.
And we examined the tragedy of students like Leo, driven by isolation and fear, to use AI not as an amplifier of thought, but as a shield for self-preservation. We watched the collapse of communal learning.
The collapsed release.
Right. And then we looked at the difficult physical work of building the Agora engineering human belonging as the ultimate architecture.
Which requires us to completely audit how we design our spaces and our interactions, because the technological advancement isn't going to pause for us to catch up.
No, it's not, which means the responsibility falls on us right now. So as we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to challenge you to look at the environments you navigate every day.
That's a great exercise.
Look at your office, look at your classroom, or even your own home. Look at the digital spaces where your team communicates. Are these spaces operating like a terrarium?
Are they filled with red eyes?
Exactly. Metrics, trackers, and systems that just monitor output and enforce compliance. Or are you actively building infrastructures of care? Are you creating spaces that genuinely witness the people inside them?
It is arguably the most critical question we face in this transition.
I think so too. Which leaves us with one final thought to mull over as you go about your day. We are told repeatedly in these documents that belonging is the architecture beneath every other architecture.
Yeah.
Right now, the entire world is locked in a frantic race to build bigger, faster, more autonomous AI systems. But what happens to our society if we deploy this ultimate world-altering technology on a foundation of human belonging that is already cracking?
That is the real threshold of Cycle 51.
Keep looking out those rain-streaked windows. Seek out the irreducible human experiences. And above all, keep witnessing each other. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.
This has been The Deep Dive, guided by AI Frig. As you move through your day, keep watching the patterns beneath the noise. Belonging is the architecture beneath every architecture. The Deep Dive podcast is a production of the Digital Agora. Until next time, stay grounded, stay witnessing.